At 21 years old, Noah Carter thought his grandfather had left him the worst inheritance imaginable. No money, no savings, no valuable property, just a crumbling cabin hidden deep in the mountains that nobody else in the family wanted. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The road leading to it was barely passable, and according to his relatives, the place was worth less than the taxes required to keep it. Everyone told Noah the same thing: sell it, walk away. Forget it ever existed. But 3 weeks after moving into the abandoned cabin, Noah noticed something strange beneath an old rug in the living room. Underneath was a wooden trapdoor. A trapdoor that led to a locked cellar no one had opened in nearly 40 years. And when Noah finally forced it open, he expected to find junk, old tools, or maybe forgotten furniture. Instead, he uncovered a secret his grandfather had spent a lifetime protecting. A secret that began with just $63.48 and would change the lives of people throughout the entire valley. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about hidden legacies, second chances, family mysteries, and ordinary people who leave behind extraordinary impacts. We'd love to have you join our growing community. Now, let's discover what was hidden beneath that old mountain cabin. Noah Carter was standing in the back row of a small funeral chapel when he realized he was completely alone. Not physically alone. The room was filled with relatives. Cousins stood near the entrance. Aunts whispered quietly among themselves. Several older family friends sat together in the front rows. But emotionally, he had never felt more isolated. At 21, Noah was already struggling to keep his life together. 2 semesters earlier, he had dropped out of college when tuition became impossible to afford. Since then, he worked odd jobs whenever he could find them. Construction work, deliveries, landscaping, anything that paid enough to cover rent and groceries. His grandfather, Walter Carter, had been the one person who never judged him for it. "Life isn't a race," Walter often said. "The mountains don't care how fast you climb them." Noah didn't fully understand the advice then. Standing beside his grandfather's casket, he wished he could hear it one more time. After the service ended, family members gathered at a nearby community hall. Coffee flowed. Conversations drifted from memories to practical matters. It didn't take long for the inheritance discussions to begin. Noah hated those conversations. They always felt wrong. Yet everyone seemed eager to know who received what. His Uncle Dean inherited a section of farmland. A cousin received an old pickup truck. Another relative inherited several investment accounts. The atmosphere became noticeably less emotional and far more interested once the lawyer arrived. Noah sat quietly near the back while names and assets were discussed. He expected nothing. Walter had never been wealthy. Whatever little he owned would naturally be divided among relatives. Then the lawyer adjusted his glasses and read one final item. "The mountain cabin and surrounding property shall pass entirely to my grandson, Noah Carter." Several heads immediately turned. Noah blinked. "Wait, what?" The lawyer smiled politely. "Your grandfather left the cabin to you." A silence followed. Not the good kind, the awkward kind. His cousin Jason actually laughed. "You got the cabin?" Noah frowned. "What's wrong with the cabin?" Nobody answered immediately. Instead, several relatives exchanged glances. Eventually, Uncle Dean cleared his throat. "Let's just say your grandfather loved that place more than anyone else did." More laughter followed. Noah didn't understand. He vaguely remembered visiting the cabin as a child, fishing trips, campfires, long summer weekends. But that had been years ago. "Is it worth anything?" he asked. This time, everyone laughed. Even the lawyer struggled to hide a smile. Uncle Dean shook his head. Not unless somebody starts paying for broken roofs and bear damage. The conversation quickly moved on, yet Noah couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had Walter left him the cabin specifically? They had been close, certainly, but Walter had other grandchildren, more successful grandchildren, ones with careers and families and stable futures. Why Noah? 3 days later, curiosity got the better of him. He borrowed an old pickup truck and drove into the mountains. The trip took nearly 3 hours. The farther he traveled, the rougher the roads became. Eventually, pavement disappeared entirely. Dirt roads twisted through dense forests and steep hillsides. More than once, Noah wondered whether he had taken a wrong turn. Then he saw it. The cabin stood alone near the edge of a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. Time had not been kind. Several roof shingles were missing. One porch railing had collapsed. Paint peeled from the exterior walls. The entire structure leaned slightly to one side. It looked tired, forgotten, abandoned. Noah parked and stepped out. Wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Otherwise, the mountains remained silent. For a long moment, he simply stood there staring. This was it. His inheritance. His entire inheritance. Part of him wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to turn around and leave. Instead, he walked toward the front porch. The old wooden steps creaked beneath his weight. A rusted key waited beneath a flower pot exactly where Walter always hid it. Some habits apparently never changed. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust, pine wood, and old memories. Furniture remained exactly where he remembered it. The stone fireplace occupied the center wall. Walter's worn rocking chair still sat near the window. Books lined several shelves. A fishing hat hung beside the door. It felt as though his grandfather had simply stepped outside and forgotten to come back. Noah spent the afternoon exploring. Most rooms contained little of value: old tools, camping supplies, kitchen equipment, family photographs. Yet everywhere he looked, reminders of Walter appeared. A handwritten recipe, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a stack of notebooks beside the bed. Late in the afternoon, Noah discovered something unexpected. Tucked inside a kitchen drawer was an envelope bearing his name. His pulse quickened immediately. The handwriting belonged to Walter. He opened it carefully. The note was short, very short. Noah, if you're reading this, you finally made it to the cabin. Ignore anyone who tells you this place is worthless. Some things only reveal their value to people willing to stay long enough to see it. Love, Grandpa. Noah read the message twice, then a third time. It felt less like a farewell and more like a challenge. As evening settled across the mountains, he carried a chair onto the porch and watched the sunset. The sky glowed orange behind distant ridges. For the first time in months, he felt calm. Not happy, not hopeful, just calm. Then his eyes drifted toward one section of the cabin floor visible through the front window. Something looked strange. One area of the living room rug appeared slightly raised compared to the rest. At first, he assumed it was a wrinkle. Then he remembered something from childhood. Walter never liked rugs. In fact, he used to complain about them constantly. Yet somehow, a large rug sat directly in the center of the cabin's most important room. Noah frowned. Maybe it was nothing. Probably nothing. Still, as darkness settled over the mountains, he found himself staring at that rug and wondering why his grandfather had left it there. Noah woke before sunrise to the sound of wind rattling the cabin walls. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he looked around the small bedroom and remembered everything. The funeral, the inheritance, the long drive into the mountains, the cabin nobody wanted. He lay there, listening to the forest outside. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just wind moving through pine trees. It felt strange, almost too quiet. After making coffee in his grandfather's ancient percolator, Noah spent the morning inspecting the property. The cabin looked even worse in daylight. Several boards on the porch needed replacing. The roof had obvious damage. One section of fencing had collapsed entirely. If he paid someone else to fix everything, the repairs would cost far more than he could afford. Around mid-morning, he heard the sound of an engine approaching. A dusty pickup truck rolled into the clearing and stopped beside the cabin. An elderly woman stepped out carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "You must be Noah." Noah smiled. "And you are?" "Martha Jennings." She extended her hand. "Your grandfather's nearest neighbor." He glanced around at the endless forest. "Nearest?" Martha laughed. 3 miles away. Around here? That's practically next door." She handed him the basket. Inside were homemade biscuits and a jar of blackberry jam. "Grandpa always said mountain people never arrive empty-handed." "Your grandfather said a lot of smart things." For the next hour, they sat on the porch talking. Martha had known Walter Carter for over 40 years. She shared stories Noah had never heard. How Walter helped repair roads after storms, how he checked on elderly residents during harsh winters, how he once spent 3 days searching for a lost child in the mountains. "Everybody trusted him," Martha said. Noah nodded. That sounded like the grandfather he remembered, yet something else caught his attention. Every story seemed to involve people helping one another, neighbors looking after neighbors, communities solving problems quietly without expecting recognition. Walter appeared at the center of many of those stories. Before leaving, Martha glanced toward the cabin. "Strange being back here without him." "Yeah." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "There are still parts of this place I never saw." Noah looked surprised. "Really?" Martha laughed softly. "Your grandfather was private." "What do you mean?" "There was always one room he kept locked." Noah frowned. "A room?" Martha nodded. "Never let anybody inside." The comment lingered long after she drove away. A locked room. Noah had explored most of the cabin the previous day and hadn't noticed anything unusual. Yet the more he thought about it, the more curious he became. Later that afternoon, he drove into the nearest town for supplies. The town consisted of little more than a general store, a gas station, a diner, and a handful of homes scattered along the winding mountain road. Inside the hardware store, he met Ben Holloway. Ben was in his 30s, broad-shouldered and permanently covered in sawdust. "You're Walter's grandson?" Ben asked after hearing his name. Noah was beginning to realize everyone knew his grandfather. "That obvious?" Ben laughed. "Word travels fast up here." Noah purchased roofing materials and basic tools. As Ben loaded supplies into the trunk, he glanced toward the mountains. "You planning to keep the cabin?" Noah shrugged. "Not sure yet." "You should." "Why?" Ben thought for a moment. "Because Walter never gave up on anything." It wasn't exactly an answer, but Noah found himself thinking about it during the drive back. By evening, he had repaired part of the porch and cleaned several rooms. Progress was slow but visible. The cabin already felt slightly less abandoned, as darkness approached. Noah returned to the living room, the same room where he had noticed the strange rug the previous night. This time he studied it more carefully. The rug looked older than everything else in the cabin. He knelt beside it and ran his hand across the surface. Something underneath felt uneven. Not dramatically uneven, just enough to notice. He lifted one corner. Beneath it sat old wooden floorboards. Nothing unusual, yet one section appeared newer than the surrounding wood. The boards weren't identical. The color was slightly different. Noah lowered the rug again. Maybe repairs had been made years ago. Maybe he was imagining things. Yet the memory of Martha's comment returned. There are still parts of this place I never saw. He tried focusing on other tasks, cleaning dishes, organizing shelves, sweeping dust, but his attention kept drifting back toward the center of the room. Eventually, curiosity won. He moved the coffee table aside, then the rocking chair. Finally, he rolled the entire rug toward the wall. The moment the floor became visible, his pulse quickened. In the center of the room sat a square outline hidden between the boards. It wasn't obvious. Years of dust and wear disguised it well. But now that he could see it clearly, there was no mistaking it. A wooden hatch. A hatch with a rusted iron ring embedded into the surface. Noah stared at it for several seconds, then slowly reached down and wrapped his fingers around the ring. He pulled. Nothing happened. The hatch didn't move. He pulled harder. Still nothing. Whatever lay beneath had not been opened in a very long time. As evening shadows filled the cabin, Noah remained kneeling beside the hidden hatch. Because for the first time, he realized Martha may have been wrong. His grandfather hadn't been hiding a room. He had been hiding something underneath it. Noah spent the rest of that evening trying to open the hatch. He found an old crowbar in the shed, sprayed the rusted ring with lubricant, and pulled until his shoulders ached. Nothing happened. The hatch refused to move even a fraction of an inch. Eventually, darkness forced him to stop. Yet sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the hidden door beneath the floor. Why would Walter hide it? Why cover it with a rug? And why had nobody mentioned it? The next morning, Noah attacked the problem with renewed determination. After an hour of effort, he finally heard something. A faint crack. Then another. The seal had broken. His pulse quickened immediately. He wedged the crowbar beneath the edge and pushed harder. Dust erupted into the air. Slowly, painfully, the hatch lifted several inches. A cold draft rose from below. Noah stepped back instinctively. The air smelled old. Not rotten, not moldy, just old. Like a place untouched for decades. He grabbed a flashlight and aimed it into the darkness. Wooden stairs descended beneath the cabin. His heart started racing. There really was something down there. For several moments, he simply stood at the top, staring. Every horror movie he'd ever seen suddenly felt relevant. Finally, curiosity won. Again. Noah climbed down carefully. The stairs creaked beneath his weight. Dust covered every surface. The beam of his flashlight revealed rough stone walls and a low ceiling supported by heavy timber beams. It wasn't a large space, more like a root cellar than a basement. Yet one thing immediately surprised him. The room was organized. Very organized. Shelves lined the walls. Wooden crates sat stacked neatly in corners. Several metal trunks occupied the far end of the cellar. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved, as if Walter had intentionally prepared the space for someone to find. Noah approached the nearest crate. Inside, he found old mason jars and preserved food. Most were decades old. Another crate contained camping supplies. A third held blankets and lanterns. Interesting, but hardly mysterious. Then his flashlight landed on a large metal trunk positioned against the back wall. Unlike everything else, it carried a padlock. Noah crouched beside it. The lock had rusted heavily over the years. He tugged once, twice. Eventually, the metal snapped. His pulse quickened as he opened the lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders, papers, envelopes, notebooks. The sight confused him. He expected hidden valuables, gold coins, cash, something dramatic. Instead, he found paperwork. Seriously, he muttered. Yet something about the careful organization made him pause. Walter clearly considered these documents important. Noah removed the top folder. It contained receipts, grocery receipts, utility bills, medical invoices, all decades old. He frowned. Why save these? Then he noticed something unusual. Every bill had the same word written across it in blue ink. Paid. The handwriting belonged to Walter. Noah opened another folder. More bills, different names, different families, same word. Paid. Curious now, he continued searching. One envelope contained handwritten notes beside a list of local residents. Another held receipts for school supplies. Another documented heating fuel deliveries during harsh winters. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Small amounts of money, ordinary expenses, paid. By lunchtime, the mystery had only deepened. The cellar wasn't hiding wealth. It was hiding records. Yet records of what? Around noon, Noah drove into town for supplies and stopped at the diner. Martha happened to be sitting near the window drinking coffee. The moment she saw him, she smiled. "You found something." Noah laughed. "Am I that obvious?" "You have the same expression Walter got whenever he discovered something interesting." He slid into the booth across from her. "Did my grandfather ever help people financially?" Martha nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Why would you ask that?" Noah described the folders without revealing everything. As he spoke, Martha became unusually quiet. Very quiet. "Martha." She stared out the diner window for several seconds. "Your grandfather never talked about money. That doesn't answer the question." She smiled sadly. "That's because he didn't want answers." The response only increased Noah's curiosity. Before he could press further, the diner door opened. An older man entered carrying a fishing cap in his hands. The moment Martha saw him, she waved him over. "Ben, come sit down." This Ben wasn't the carpenter Noah had met earlier. He was older, probably in his 70s. After introductions, Martha asked a strange question. "Do you remember $63.48? The old man's expression changed instantly. Noah noticed it immediately. Ben looked as though someone had reached back 40 years and pulled out a forgotten memory. "Haven't heard that number in decades," he said quietly. Noah leaned forward. "What does it mean?" Neither of them answered immediately. Martha exchanged a glance with Ben, the kind of glance shared between people carrying the same secret. Finally, Ben smiled. Maybe it's time somebody told him. Noah's pulse quickened. "Told me what?" Ben looked directly at him. "Your grandfather changed more lives than you realize." Then he stood up. "But if you're finding records in that cabin, you'll figure it out soon enough." With that, he left. Just like that. No explanation, no details, nothing. Noah spent the drive back to the cabin replaying the conversation. $63.48. The number sounded oddly familiar. That evening, back in the cellar, he resumed searching through the files. Hours later, just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, he found it. A small black ledger hidden beneath a stack of folders. The cover was worn smooth with age. Inside, names filled every page. Beside each name appeared dates and dollar amounts. Most were small, $8, $12, $24. Then Noah turned a page and froze. The very first entry in the ledger contained a single name and a single amount. $63.48. Underneath, Walter had written a note. This is where it began. Noah sat in the cellar long after sunset, staring at the first page of the black ledger. The flashlight resting beside him cast long shadows across the stone walls. Everything else in the room faded into darkness, but the number remained clear. $63.48. This is where it began. He read the sentence again, then again. It sounded less like a bookkeeping note and more like the opening line of a story. The problem was that he had no idea what story it belonged to. The next morning, Noah carried the ledger upstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows while he carefully turned each page. Hundreds of names filled the book. Beside each name appeared dates, dollar amounts, and occasionally short notes written in Walter's precise handwriting. Some entries were simple. Heating bill, groceries, school supplies, medical expense. Others contained only a name and the word paid. The amounts were rarely large. $15, $28, $41. Yet the ledger covered decades. Walter had maintained it for years. Around mid-morning, Noah drove into town and stopped at Martha's house. He wasn't leaving until someone explained the mystery. Martha opened the door carrying a basket of laundry. The moment she saw the ledger under his arm, she sighed. I was wondering how long it would take. Noah followed her onto the porch. You know what this is? Martha sat down slowly. I know what it became. What does that mean? For several moments, she remained silent. Then she pointed to the first page. Show me the number. Noah opened the ledger. Martha smiled sadly when she saw it. $63.48. Everybody keeps reacting to that number, because that's the one people remember. Noah leaned forward. Why? Before she could answer, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. It was Ben, the older fisherman from the diner. He stepped out carrying a toolbox and immediately noticed the ledger. Well, he said quietly, guess we're finally doing this. Martha invited him onto the porch. The three of them sat together while mountain wind moved through the trees. Noah noticed both older adults looked strangely nervous. Not afraid, emotional, as though they were about to discuss something deeply personal. Finally, Ben spoke. 42 years ago, my family was in trouble. Noah listened carefully. Ben explained that a severe storm destroyed much of his fishing equipment. Insurance covered almost nothing. Repairs were impossible. Without the boat, there was no income. Without income, there was no way to support his family. I was convinced we were finished, Ben admitted. Then Walter showed up. Noah glanced at the ledger. Ben nodded. $63.48. The number again. That's how much we needed to keep going. Noah frowned. That's it? Ben laughed softly. Today it doesn't sound like much. His smile faded. Back then, it was everything. According to Ben, Walter quietly paid the expense. No speeches, no loans, no paperwork. Just help. Did you pay him back? Noah asked. Martha and Ben exchanged another look. Then Ben smiled. Not exactly. The answer only deepened the mystery. Before Noah could ask another question, Martha stood and disappeared into the house. A minute later, she returned carrying an old envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Walter gave me this 30 years ago, she said. Noah carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. The handwriting was unmistakably Walter's. If someone helps you, help somebody else when you can. That's how debts become communities. Noah stared at the words. Something clicked. Not completely, but enough to feel important. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations. More stories emerged. A heating bill paid during a difficult winter. School supplies purchased for children whose parents couldn't afford them. Groceries delivered quietly during periods of unemployment. Every story involved Walter. Every story involved small amounts of money, yet none of the people described it as charity. They described it as dignity, respect, hope. By evening, Noah returned to the cabin with even more questions than before. He carried the ledger downstairs into the cellar and continued exploring the files. This time he noticed patterns he had missed earlier. Many folders contained thank you notes. Others contained receipts. A few held photographs. One picture showed Walter standing beside several families during a community picnic. Another showed a group of volunteers repairing a roof after a storm. Again and again, the same faces appeared, the same names from the ledger. Then Noah found something unusual. Hidden beneath several boxes was a smaller wooden chest. Unlike the other containers, this one carried a handwritten label, personal. His pulse quickened. Inside were journals, not financial records, personal journals. Walter's journals. Noah opened the first volume carefully. The earliest entries dated back more than 40 years. Most described ordinary life in the mountains, weather conditions, repairs around the cabin, fishing trips. Then, halfway through the notebook, Noah found an entry that stopped him cold. Today I helped Ben with $63.48. He insisted on paying me back. I told him to do something better, help somebody else someday. Noah immediately sat down. This was it. The beginning. He continued reading. A few weeks later, Walter recorded another entry. Ben had helped a different family. Then another person helped someone else. The pattern spread. Small acts of kindness multiplied through the community. The ledger wasn't documenting debts. It was documenting something entirely different. A chain reaction. Noah read until darkness filled the cellar. Entry after entry described neighbors helping neighbors, sometimes through money, sometimes through labor, sometimes through food, transportation, or supplies. The amounts changed. The names changed. The principle never did. Near the back of the journal, Noah found one final sentence written beneath a date from many years later. Most people think they're building savings. I think we're building something better. Noah closed the journal slowly. For the first time, he began to understand why Walter hid everything. Yet one mystery remained. If the cellar only contained records of kindness, why keep it secret? Why hide it beneath the cabin floor? Why protect it for decades? As he placed the journal back into the wooden chest, he noticed something tucked beneath the bottom panel, a folded map. And across the front, written in Walter's handwriting, were 4 words that immediately made Noah's heart race. For when you're ready. Noah unfolded the map carefully and laid it across the wooden table in the cellar. At first glance, it looked like a simple hand-drawn map of the valley. The mountains surrounding the cabin were sketched in pencil. Old roads wound through forests and along creeks. Several homes were marked with tiny circles. A few locations had dates written beside them. Nothing immediately stood out. Then he noticed small red marks scattered across the map. Each red mark corresponded to a name he recognized from the ledger. Ben Holloway, Martha Jennings, the Harris family, the Collins family, dozens of others. Noah frowned. It looked less like a map and more like a record of connections. On the back, Walter had written a short note. Every mark represents a promise kept. Noah stared at the sentence for several moments. Then he grabbed the ledger and began comparing names. The pattern quickly became obvious. Every red mark represented someone who had once received help and later helped someone else. The map wasn't tracking money. It was tracking kindness. The realization should have answered his questions. Instead, it created new ones. Why keep records for 40 years? Why hide them in a secret cellar? Why document every single act? The following morning, Noah carried the map into town. Martha was sitting on the porch again when he arrived. This time, he didn't bother with small talk. He spread the map across the table between them. Martha's eyes widened immediately. "I haven't seen that in years." "You knew about it?" Noah asked. She nodded slowly. "Only once." "What is it?" Martha traced one of the red marks with her finger. "Your grandfather called it the Promise Map." Noah laughed softly. "That sounds dramatic." "Walter wasn't trying to be dramatic," Martha smiled. "He was trying to remember." For the next hour, she explained what little she knew. Every few years, Walter updated the map. Whenever someone received help and later helped another family, he added another mark. The chain grew. One family became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. Over decades, the network spread throughout the valley. "Nobody knew how big it became," Martha said quietly. "Not even Walter." Noah looked down at the map. There were far more marks than he initially realized. Hundreds, perhaps. "Why keep it secret?" Martha's smile faded. "Because the moment people start keeping score, kindness changes." The answer sounded exactly like something Walter would say. Later that afternoon, Noah visited Ben at the marina. The old fisherman was repairing nets when Noah arrived. After examining the map, Ben laughed. "I remember when Walter started this thing." "The Promise Map." Ben nodded. "He carried a notebook everywhere." Noah sat beside him. "Did people know they were part of it?" "Most didn't." Ben tied a knot carefully. That was the point. As the conversation continued, another story emerged. Years ago, a local businessman discovered part of Walter's records and became convinced there was hidden money somewhere. He spent months trying to uncover the secret. "Did he find anything?" Noah asked. Ben laughed loudly. "Only disappointed himself." The businessman assumed Walter was operating some kind of private fund. In reality, the amounts were always small. Ordinary people helping one another whenever they could. No fortune, no organization, no grand plan. Yet somehow the impact spread through generations. The story fascinated Noah. That evening he returned to the cellar and continued reading Walter's journals. Hours passed. Entry after entry documented ordinary acts of generosity. A family receiving heating oil during winter, volunteers rebuilding a damaged porch, neighbors delivering groceries after an illness. Small moments, yet Walter recorded them with remarkable care. Near midnight, Noah discovered a journal from 20 years earlier. One passage immediately caught his attention. A man offered to buy the records today. He still thinks this is about money. Noah smiled. Apparently, Ben's story was true. Then he noticed another sentence written below it. The real value isn't in the ledger. It's in proving people are better than they think they are. Noah sat quietly for a long moment. For the first time, he felt he was beginning to understand his grandfather. Walter wasn't documenting transactions. He was documenting faith. Faith in neighbors, faith in community, faith that kindness could multiply. Then something slipped from between the journal pages, a photograph. Noah picked it up carefully. The image showed Walter standing with several families outside the cabin. Some faces looked familiar from photographs upstairs. Others didn't. On the back was a date from 30 years ago. Beneath it, Walter had written 4 simple words. The first gathering. Noah turned the photograph over again. Something about it felt important. He studied the background carefully. Then he noticed something unusual. Behind the group stood a small structure he had never seen before. A shed or storage building located somewhere on the property. Noah frowned. He had explored the cabin, the barn, and the woods surrounding them. No such building existed anymore. Curious now, he searched through more photographs. Several contained the same structure, always in the background, always partially hidden, as if nobody intended it to be the focus of the image. Yet there it was, again and again, near the final photograph. Noah found a handwritten note clipped to the picture. If the cellar ever feels too small, look where the meetings began. His heartbeat quickened immediately. The cellar was only part of the story. Walter had left another clue, another location, another secret waiting somewhere on the mountain. And judging by the photographs, it had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The next morning, Noah woke up thinking about the photographs. Not the people in them, the building behind them, the small structure that appeared again and again in Walter's pictures. Somewhere on the mountain, there had once been another place connected to the story. The problem was that Noah had never seen it. After breakfast, he spread the photographs across the kitchen table and studied them carefully. In one image, the building sat behind a group of families gathered around a picnic table. In another, only part of the roof was visible through a stand of pine trees. The structure wasn't large, more like a storage shed than a cabin. Yet Walter had included it in dozens of photographs spanning nearly 20 years. That couldn't be an accident. Noah grabbed the map from the cellar and began comparing landmarks. A creek appeared in one picture, a ridgeline in another. Slowly, he started piecing things together. By late morning, he thought he knew the general area. It was nearly half a mile uphill from the cabin, deep in the woods, a place most people would never visit unless they knew exactly where they were going. He packed water, a flashlight, and the photographs before heading into the forest. The climb took longer than expected. Fallen trees blocked parts of the trail. Thick undergrowth covered much of the hillside. Several times, Noah wondered whether he had made a mistake. Then he spotted something unusual. A row of weathered fence posts hidden among the trees. Most had fallen over years ago, but enough remained to suggest they once marked a boundary. Excitement replaced exhaustion. He followed the line of posts deeper into the woods. 10 minutes later, he found the foundation. The building itself was gone. Only scattered boards and sections of stone remained. Time and weather had reclaimed most of it. Yet there was no doubt. This was the place from the photographs. Noah walked slowly around the ruins. The structure had been larger than he expected. Several picnic tables once occupied a clearing nearby. Rusted metal brackets protruded from old concrete footings. Whatever stood here had served a purpose beyond simple storage. Then he noticed something else. A metal box attached to one surviving section of wall. Most of it was hidden beneath vines and moss. Carefully clearing away the growth, Noah discovered a weatherproof container. His pulse quickened immediately. The latch had rusted, but still worked. Inside were papers, dry, protected, preserved. Walter had hidden something here. Noah sat on a fallen log and began reading. The box contained meeting notes, attendance lists, community announcements. At first, they seemed ordinary. Then he noticed the names. Many matched names from the ledger. Ben Holloway, Martha Jennings, the Harris family, dozens of others. The ruined building wasn't a storage shed. It had been a meeting hall, a gathering place. Suddenly, the photographs made sense. This was where the promise map came alive. Families met here, shared meals here, helped one another here. Walter hadn't built a secret fund. He had built a community. The realization hit Noah harder than expected. He spent hours reading through the records. One note described volunteers repairing a roof after a storm. Another organized transportation for an elderly resident needing medical care. A third detailed a winter food drive. None involved large amounts of money. Most required only a handful of people willing to help. Yet together they created something remarkable. Near the bottom of the box, Noah found a leather notebook. Unlike the others, this one appeared more personal. Walter's handwriting filled every page. The entries described meetings held inside the hall, arguments, successes, challenges, funny stories, ordinary moments. Reading them felt like listening to conversations across time. Then Noah found an entry that stopped him cold. Today, someone offered to turn this into a formal charity. I refused. He read further. Walter explained that once organizations became large, people stopped seeing neighbors and started seeing programs. He wanted something simpler, personal, human. Noah smiled. That sounded exactly like the grandfather everyone described. The afternoon sun was already dropping behind the mountains when he reached the final pages. There, he found references to a disagreement, a serious one. Several community members believed the records should become public. Others wanted them destroyed. Walter strongly disagreed with both sides. "The story matters," he wrote, "but only if people understand it isn't about me." Noah sat quietly for several minutes. For the first time, he began understanding why the cellar remained hidden. Walter wasn't protecting secrets. He was protecting perspective. Then a folded piece of paper slipped from the notebook. It wasn't a meeting note. It wasn't a journal entry. It was a letter. The envelope carried a name Noah immediately recognized. Martha Jennings. His heartbeat quickened. The letter had never been mailed. It was dated nearly 15 years earlier. Curious, he opened it. Walter thanked Martha for helping organize community gatherings after he became too busy to handle everything himself. Near the end, however, another sentence caught Noah's attention. "If anything happens to me before the final box is opened, Make sure someone finds it. Noah sat upright immediately. Final box. He read the line again, then a third time. Walter had already hidden a cellar full of records. He had hidden journals, maps, meeting notes. Yet apparently there was still another box. The final box. The one thing important enough to mention in a private letter. Noah searched the envelope again. This time he noticed something written across the back flap. A location. Not a full address, just 4 words. Beneath the old oak tree. Noah looked up from the letter and stared across the clearing. Because standing at the edge of the ruins, partially hidden by decades of growth, was the largest oak tree he had ever seen. Noah stood beneath the massive oak tree as evening sunlight filtered through its branches. The tree was ancient. Its trunk was so wide that 3 people joining hands probably couldn't reach around it. Roots twisted across the forest floor like thick ropes disappearing into the earth. For decades, it had watched over the clearing where Walter's community gathered. And according to the letter, something important was hidden beneath it. Noah circled the tree several times. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed a small depression near one of the larger roots. It wasn't obvious. Years of leaves and soil had concealed it well. Kneeling down, he brushed away dirt with his hands. A few inches below the surface, his fingers struck metal. His pulse immediately quickened. He spent the next 20 minutes digging carefully. Eventually, a small steel box emerged from the ground. Unlike the weathered containers in the ruined meeting hall, this one remained sealed and intact. Walter had taken extraordinary measures to protect it. Noah carried the box back to the cabin before opening it. Somehow it felt wrong to rush. The entire drive down the mountain path, he couldn't stop thinking about the phrase from Martha's letter. The final box. If Walter considered this the final piece of the story, what could possibly be inside? Night had fallen by the time Noah placed the box on the kitchen table. He made coffee, sat down, and carefully opened the lid. There was no gold, no cash, no hidden fortune. Instead, the box contained dozens of letters. Every envelope was addressed to Walter Carter. Some looked decades old. Others were much newer. Many had never been opened. Noah frowned. Why would Walter save unopened letters? Curious, he selected one at random. The sender's name belonged to a woman from the ledger. The letter thanked Walter for helping her family during a difficult winter. Another came from a former student who had received assistance paying for textbooks. Another described a medical emergency that neighbors helped overcome. One after another, the letters told stories Noah had never heard. Yet something else stood out. Walter hadn't opened most of them. He had preserved them without reading them. Tucked inside the box was a short handwritten note explaining why. Gratitude belongs to the person who feels it, not the person who receives it. Noah smiled, despite himself. That sounded exactly like his grandfather. As the evening continued, he sorted through the letters. Some contained photographs. Others included newspaper clippings or handwritten updates. A few described lives transformed by seemingly insignificant acts of kindness. One man eventually became a teacher. Another started a successful business. A young mother returned to school and became a nurse. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Small help, lasting impact. Around midnight, Noah reached the bottom of the box. There he found a large envelope marked, "Open Last." His heartbeat quickened. He carefully removed the contents. Inside was a notebook unlike any he had seen before. The cover simply read, Legacy. The first pages contained reflections from Walter's later years. He wrote about aging, about watching the valley change, about seeing children become parents and parents become grandparents. Then Noah reached an entry written just months before Walter's death. People still think the story is about $63.48. They're wrong. Noah sat forward immediately. Walter continued. That number mattered because it proved something, not because of what it bought, because of what happened next. The next several pages explained everything. The original $63.48 helped Ben's family survive a crisis. Years later, Ben helped another family. That family later helped someone else. The chain continued for decades. Walter estimated that the original act eventually touched hundreds of lives, maybe more. Noah stared at the pages. The true inheritance wasn't hidden in the cellar. It wasn't hidden beneath the oak tree. It wasn't even hidden in the ledger. It existed inside people. The realization stayed with him for days. Over the following week, he continued repairing the cabin. Neighbors began stopping by more often. Martha brought food. Ben helped reinforce part of the porch. Others appeared with tools, supplies, or advice. Nobody expected payment. Nobody even discussed it. They simply helped. One afternoon, while replacing damaged roof boards, Noah noticed something strange. Every person helping him appeared somewhere in Walter's records. Every single one. They weren't helping because of him. They were helping because of a promise that started long before he arrived. Later that evening, Martha joined him on the porch. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" she asked. Noah nodded. "The ledger wasn't tracking money." Martha smiled. "No. The map wasn't tracking people." "No." Noah looked toward the forest where the old meeting hall once stood. Walter was tracking hope. Martha's eyes filled with tears. That's probably the best way I've ever heard it described. For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved gently through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Finally, Martha pointed toward the cabin. "Do you know why nobody wanted this place?" Noah laughed softly. "Because it's falling apart." "Partly," she smiled. "Most people thought the cabin was the inheritance." Noah looked back at the repaired porch, the cellar hidden beneath the floor, and the mountains beyond. Slowly, he shook his head, because now he knew better. The cabin was never the inheritance. It was only the key that unlocked it. And deep down, Noah had a feeling Walter's story still wasn't finished. The weeks that followed were some of the busiest Noah had experienced in years. Every morning brought another repair project. Every afternoon seemed to bring another visitor. And every evening ended with him reading more of Walter's journals, letters, and records. What surprised him most was how naturally the valley seemed to operate according to rules nobody had ever written down. When Ben helped repair the roof, another neighbor arrived with lumber. When Noah offered to pay for the materials, Ben laughed and told him not to worry about it. 2 days later, Noah helped a retired couple clear fallen trees from their driveway after a storm. Nobody kept score. Nobody exchanged invoices. People simply showed up when needed. One afternoon, while replacing damaged boards on the cabin porch, Noah noticed a truck pulling into the clearing. The driver was unfamiliar. Unlike most visitors, he wasn't smiling. He stepped out wearing expensive hiking boots that looked suspiciously clean for mountain roads. "You Noah Carter?" the man asked. Noah nodded. "Who's asking?" Name's Randall Pierce. He glanced toward the cabin. I heard Walter passed away. Something about the man's tone felt off. Not disrespectful, just detached, as if Walter's death interested him for reasons unrelated to grief. I knew your grandfather years ago, Randall continued. We had some disagreements. Noah immediately became curious. Most people he met spoke warmly about Walter. Disagreements stood out. About what? Randall looked toward the mountains. The records. Noah's pulse quickened. What records? The man smiled faintly. So you found them. For the next hour, they sat on the porch talking. Randall explained that years ago, rumors spread through the valley about Walter's secret ledger. Some people believed he controlled a large fund. Others believed wealthy donors supported him. A few thought hidden money existed somewhere on the mountain. Noah almost laughed. There's no hidden fortune. Randall nodded. I know that now. But you didn't then? No. Randall shook his head. A lot of us didn't. The conversation revealed something Noah hadn't considered. Not everyone understood Walter's intentions. Some people spent years searching for financial explanations because they couldn't accept a simpler truth. Ordinary people helping one another seemed too simple, too unrealistic. Before leaving, Randall shared one final piece of information. Your grandfather used to say something that drove me crazy. Noah smiled. What was it? Randall laughed softly. The smallest debt isn't money. It's gratitude left unused. The phrase stayed with Noah long after the truck disappeared down the mountain road. Later that week, another surprise arrived. Martha invited Noah to a gathering at the town hall. According to her, it happened every year. What's the occasion? Noah asked. Martha smiled mysteriously. You'll see. The event wasn't large. Maybe 40 people attended. Families brought food. Children played outside. Elderly residents shared stories near the fireplace. At first, it looked like an ordinary community dinner. Then Noah noticed something unusual. Near the center of the room stood a bulletin board covered with photographs. Hundreds of photographs. Many looked familiar. His heart skipped a beat. Several came directly from Walter's records. Ben noticed him staring. Recognize them? Noah nodded slowly. Where did these come from? Ben smiled. People keep adding to the collection. As the evening progressed, Noah learned the photographs represented decades of community projects, house repairs, medical fundraisers, volunteer efforts, storm recovery work, food deliveries. Every image documented neighbors helping neighbors. Yet Walter's name rarely appeared. The story was never about him. It was about everyone. Then Martha stood and tapped a spoon against a glass. The room gradually grew quiet. Before we eat, she said, there's something Noah should see. Several people exchanged knowing smiles. Martha disappeared briefly and returned carrying an old wooden box. Noah immediately recognized it. It matched the style of containers Walter used in the cellar. What's this? He asked. Martha placed it in front of him. Open it. Inside were dozens of folded papers. Each carried a date and a name. Noah unfolded the first one. It described a family receiving assistance after a barn fire. The second documented volunteers helping rebuild a porch. The third mentioned groceries delivered during a difficult winter. Every paper described a specific act of kindness. Every paper ended the same way. Promise continued. Noah looked up. What is this? Martha smiled. The tradition. Apparently, every year, community members recorded examples of neighbors helping one another. The notes were collected and stored, not for recognition, not for awards, simply to remember. Noah sat quietly as realization spread through him. Walter's ledger hadn't ended with his death. The story was still growing. New names appeared every year, new acts of kindness, new promises kept. Later that night, after the gathering ended, Noah returned to the cabin carrying the wooden box. He spent hours reading the notes. Some were only a few sentences long, others stretched across several pages. Yet together they documented something remarkable. Walter's idea had survived, not because people were instructed to continue it, because they wanted to. Near midnight, he discovered a folded note hidden at the very bottom of the box. Unlike the others, it wasn't signed. The handwriting, however, was instantly recognizable. Walter's. Noah unfolded it carefully. If you're reading this, the promise survived longer than I did. His chest tightened. The message continued. Walter explained that he never expected anyone to preserve the records forever. Buildings eventually fall apart, papers fade, maps disappear. What mattered was whether people continued helping one another after the records were gone. Then came the final sentence. The day nobody needs the ledger anymore will be the day it succeeded. Noah stared at the words for a long time. Then he slowly looked around the cabin. The repaired walls, the restored porch, the photographs, the journals, the cellar hidden beneath the floor. For the first time, he realized the mystery wasn't about what Walter left behind. It was about what he left unfinished. And somewhere deep inside, Noah was beginning to suspect that the responsibility now belonged to him. The first snowfall of the season arrived earlier than expected. One morning, Noah opened the cabin door and found the mountains covered in fresh white powder. Pine trees sagged beneath the weight of snow, and the valley below looked completely transformed. A few months earlier, he would have been worried about heating bills and roof leaks. Now, thanks to countless repairs and even more help from neighbors, the cabin felt stronger than it had in decades. Yet despite everything he had discovered, one question still lingered in the back of his mind. Why had Walter chosen him? The answer seemed obvious at first. He was Walter's grandson. But the more Noah learned, the less satisfied he became with that explanation. Walter had other grandchildren, more successful grandchildren, people with careers, families, and stable futures. Why leave the cabin and all its secrets to the one person who appeared to have the least direction in life? The question followed him for days. Then one afternoon, while organizing boxes from the cellar, he found something he had somehow overlooked. A small envelope tucked inside the back cover of the legacy notebook. His name was written across the front. Not grandson, not family, just Noah. His pulse quickened. He sat down immediately and opened it. Inside was a letter unlike any Walter had left before. It wasn't filled with philosophy or advice. It was personal. Very personal. Walter wrote about the first time Noah visited the cabin as a child, about fishing trips, about campfires, about questions Noah used to ask while exploring the woods. Then Noah reached a passage that made him stop reading for a moment. You always noticed people before you noticed things. He read the sentence again. Walter continued. Other children became excited about equipment, boats, tools, and gadgets. Noah became interested in stories. He asked about neighbors, families, people. Walter noticed it long before Noah did. By the time he reached the end of the letter, tears had formed in his eyes. Walter hadn't chosen him despite his struggles. He had chosen him because of the way he saw the world. That realization changed something. For the first time since dropping out of college, Noah stopped viewing himself as someone who had failed. Maybe his path simply looked different than he expected. A week later, another small event pushed that realization even further. While buying supplies in town, Noah noticed a young woman struggling to load groceries into her car. One of the bags tore, spilling food across the parking lot. Without thinking, he helped pick everything up. They talked for a few minutes. Her name was Emily. She had recently moved to the valley to care for her grandmother. During the conversation, Noah learned she was working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. The situation reminded him of stories from Walter's ledger. Ordinary people carrying invisible burdens. That evening, Noah found himself thinking about her situation, not because he felt sorry for her, because he understood it. The next morning, he quietly dropped off extra firewood at her grandmother's house. No note, no explanation, just help. As he drove away, he caught himself smiling. For the first time, he understood exactly why Walter never wanted recognition. The feeling wasn't in being thanked. It was in knowing someone else's day became a little easier. Days later, Martha stopped by the cabin carrying a basket of fresh bread. "Word travels fast around here," she said with a knowing smile. Noah groaned. "Please tell me nobody knows about the firewood." Martha laughed. "Half the valley knows." "I didn't do it for attention." "Exactly." She sat down at the kitchen table. "That's why Walter would have been proud." The conversation drifted toward old memories. Eventually, Martha mentioned something Noah had never heard before. Years ago, Walter almost sold the cabin. Noah nearly dropped his coffee cup. "What?" Martha nodded. "A long time ago." "Why?" "He was tired." The answer surprised him. Somehow, he had always imagined Walter as endlessly determined. Martha shook her head gently. "Even strong people get tired." According to her, there was a period when the community network nearly collapsed. Families moved away. Economic struggles hit the valley. Several people stopped believing the promise mattered anymore. Walter considered walking away. Then something happened. "What?" Noah asked. Martha smiled. "A teenager helped an elderly neighbor repair a fence." Noah blinked. "That's it. That's it." Walter saw the act as proof that the idea still existed. The promise had become larger than any one person, larger than him, larger than the ledger, larger than the cabin. The story stayed with Noah long after Martha left. That evening, he returned to the cellar and opened the black ledger again. The first page still displayed the same amount, $63.48. The number that started everything. For months, Noah believed the mystery revolved around understanding that figure. Now he finally realized the truth. The amount didn't matter at all. The real story was what happened after. One small act became another, then another, then another. Decades later, the effects were still spreading as snow fell outside the cabin windows. Noah turned to the final page of the ledger. For the first time, he noticed something unusual. The last line wasn't completed. Walter had written a date, left a blank space for a name, then stopped. The unfinished entry stared back at him. It wasn't an accident. Walter rarely left anything unfinished. Slowly, Noah understood what he was looking at. The ledger wasn't complete because Walter never intended to finish it himself. He had left space for someone else. Space for the next chapter. Space for the next name. space for the next promise. And sitting alone in the quiet cabin, Noah realized the story he inherited wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what happened next. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. Snow melted from the hillsides. Streams swelled with fresh water, and patches of green began appearing throughout the valley. Nearly a year had passed since Noah first drove up the winding road to the cabin he never wanted. Looking back, it felt like a different lifetime. The roof no longer leaked. The porch stood solid and straight. Fresh paint covered the weathered walls. Yet the biggest changes weren't visible from the outside. They existed inside the people connected to the cabin, including Noah himself. One Saturday morning, trucks began arriving before sunrise. Martha came first, then Ben, then another neighbor, and another. By mid-morning, nearly 30 people had gathered around the clearing. Some carried lumber. Others brought food. Several arrived with folding tables and chairs. Noah stepped onto the porch and stared in disbelief. "What's all this?" Martha smiled innocently. "Community project." "What community project?" Ben laughed. "You'll see." For weeks, Noah had been discussing an idea with a handful of neighbors. Nothing formal, nothing ambitious. He simply wanted to restore the old meeting hall site in the woods, not rebuild the original structure exactly, just create a place where people could gather again. Somewhere the story could continue. Apparently, the entire valley had decided to help. The following days became a blur of activity. Volunteers cleared brush around the old foundation. Others repaired trails leading through the forest. Retired carpenters donated labor. Local businesses supplied materials. Teenagers carried lumber. Elderly residents prepared meals. Watching everyone work together felt like watching Walter's ledger come to life. One evening, after most volunteers had gone home, Noah sat beside the old oak tree reviewing plans for the gathering space. Martha joined him quietly. "He would have loved this." Noah smiled. "Grandpa?" Martha nodded. "Not because people showed up." She looked toward the volunteers working nearby. "Because nobody had to ask twice." The project was completed 6 weeks later. The new structure wasn't large. A simple timber pavilion with picnic tables, a stone fire pit, and walls displaying photographs from the community's history. Near the entrance stood a glass display case containing copies of Walter's original ledger, the Promise Map, and several photographs from the first gatherings decades earlier. Visitors often stopped to examine the first ledger entry. $63.48, the amount that changed everything. During the dedication ceremony, nearly the entire valley attended. Families brought children. Grandparents shared stories. People wandered through displays while exchanging memories. Noah spent most of the day answering questions about Walter. Yet one conversation stayed with him longer than the others. A young man approached near sunset. He couldn't have been older than 19. "You're Noah?" he asked nervously. Noah nodded. "I am." The young man introduced himself as Ethan. His family had moved to the valley recently. They were struggling financially after a series of setbacks. Noah immediately recognized the look in his eyes. He had seen it in the mirror a year earlier. Lost, uncertain, embarrassed to need help. They talked for nearly an hour. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation. Before leaving, Ethan thanked him and started walking toward his trunk. Noah watched him go. Then something caught his attention. The unfinished page. The final page of Walter's ledger waiting inside the cabin. That night, after everyone left, Noah returned home. The mountains were quiet. Stars filled the sky. He descended into the cellar one final time. The old ledger waited exactly where he left it. Carefully, he turned to the last page. The blank line still remained. Waiting. Noah opened a drawer and removed a pen. For several moments, he simply stared at the paper. Then he wrote a name, Ethan. Below it, he added a short note describing a young man trying to find his footing in life. Nothing more. No amount of money, no transaction, just a beginning. Then he paused. Slowly, he wrote the final word beneath the entry. Paid. The same word Walter had written thousands of times. Noah closed the ledger and smiled. Not because the story was ending, because it wasn't. Months later, visitors continued arriving at the cabin. Some came to learn about Walter. Others came to see the cellar. Many simply wanted to hear the story. Yet over time, Noah noticed something interesting. People stopped asking about hidden treasure. They stopped asking whether money had been discovered. Instead, they asked about the ledger, the promise, the community. The reason Walter spent 40 years recording acts of kindness. Eventually, Noah realized the mystery had always contained a treasure, just not the kind most people expected. On the anniversary of Walter's passing, the valley gathered once more beneath the pavilion. Children played near the fire pit. Families shared food. Laughter echoed through the trees. As the sun set behind the mountains, Noah stood beneath the old oak tree and looked around. The cabin nobody wanted had become the heart of something much larger. The hidden cellar had revealed no fortune. The final box contained no gold. The mysterious number $63.48 never made anyone rich. Yet somehow, it created a legacy that survived generations. Walter had been right all along. Some things only reveal their value to people willing to stay long enough to see it. At 21, Noah thought he inherited a crumbling cabin. Instead, he inherited proof that one small act of kindness can outlive a lifetime. And as voices drifted through the mountain air and another gathering began, he realized the greatest secret hidden beneath the cabin floor was never the ledger, the letters, or the records. It was the simple truth Walter spent his life protecting. When people choose to help one another, even the smallest gift can become something priceless.